Imagine waking up tomorrow, stepping outside, and realizing the world is completely empty. No humans, no cars, no voices, only silence. Cities are frozen in time, streets littered with abandoned vehicles, and wildlife roaming freely where people once ruled. What would happen if humanity vanished overnight? How quickly would nature reclaim the planet? And what hidden dangers would emerge in our absence? Hi everyone. Today we will explore one of the most fascinating what-if scenarios ever imagined. What if humans disappeared tomorrow? We'll dive into the science, the theories, and the myths behind a world suddenly abandoned by people. From collapsing cities, to wildlife reclaiming urban landscapes, and from environmental disasters, to the surprising resilience of nature. This is a journey into a planet without humans. In the immediate hours, the most obvious change would be the disappearance of all organized systems humans depend on. Power plants, traffic lights, transportation networks, and emergency services all cease functioning. Nuclear power plants, for instance, require constant monitoring. Some reactors might continue running on automated systems for a short period, but without human intervention, meltdowns could occur within days or weeks. Cities built around these plants, such as Tokyo, Paris, or Chicago, could face catastrophic consequences, releasing radiation that slowly alters ecosystems and impacts nearby wildlife. Electricity grids would fail rapidly across the globe. Backup generators might sustain certain areas for a few days, but fuel eventually runs out. Water treatment plants would shut down, leaving rivers, lakes, and reservoirs contaminated. Sewage systems would back up, and chemical plants could leak toxins into surrounding areas within weeks. These failures would create invisible hazards for wildlife, altering ecosystems in ways we can only begin to imagine. Transportation systems would come to an abrupt halt. Cars left in streets would eventually stop as fuel runs out. Trains would halt mid-track, leaving long, ghostly lines across countries. Airplanes in mid-air might glide for a while, but without pilots, they would eventually crash or land safely only by chance. Shipping containers and trains carrying hazardous materials could spill their contents, adding another layer of danger to abandoned cities. Domesticated animals would face immediate challenges. Dogs, cats, and other pets may initially struggle without humans to feed them. Some would adapt, turning feral and forming packs to survive, while many could perish within months. Livestock such as cows, pigs, and chickens, bred for human care, would see dramatic population declines in urban areas, though some in rural pastures might graze freely for a time before overpopulation or lack of forage causes natural die-offs. Meanwhile, wild animals would experience sudden freedom. Deer, foxes, and boars might venture into cities, and birds would dominate the skies and streets. Urban ecosystems would transform, creating a new balance between predator and prey. Pigeon populations may initially boom due to leftover human food, but would later stabilize as natural predators, like hawks, owls, or feral cats, adapt to the new environment. Nature has an incredible ability to reclaim spaces abandoned by humans. The Chernobyl exclusion zone offers a real-world example. Despite high radiation levels, wolves, lynxes, boars, and even wild horses thrive in areas humans left behind. Within months of humanity's disappearance, cities would start to resemble miniature forests. Parks, gardens, and streets would sprout grasses, shrubs, and even small trees. Asphalt and concrete, left to weather, would crack and crumble under moss and root systems. Rivers and wetlands could expand as dams fail, and water flows unregulated, creating new habitats for fish, amphibians, and birds. However, the first months wouldn't be entirely peaceful. Fires could ignite in abandoned buildings or industrial complexes, spreading unchecked across neighborhoods and cities. Toxic chemicals from failing factories, fuel stations, and storage facilities might contaminate rivers and soils, creating localized disasters. Scientists theorize that the first year of human absence would be a chaotic mix of destruction and regrowth. Nature would begin reclaiming its territory, but leftover hazards from our industrial footprint could create dangerous zones that persist for decades. Global infrastructure would start collapsing in predictable and unpredictable ways. Roads, bridges, and tunnels require constant maintenance, and without it, erosion, weather damage, and neglect would accelerate decay. Highways would crack, and overpasses might collapse under the weight of nature. Reclaiming space, airports, skyscrapers, and stadiums would become skeletal reminders of human civilization, slowly being overtaken by vegetation and wildlife. Satellites orbiting Earth would continue to function for a time, transmitting data until systems fail without human intervention. Communication networks, the internet, and GPS services would collapse, leaving the planet in a state of informational darkness. Long-term experiments, climate monitoring stations, and scientific instruments would fall silent, halting human observation of Earth's changes. Coastal ecosystems would see profound changes. Beaches, previously crowded and polluted, would slowly become pristine. Coral reefs could regenerate without overfishing or pollution. Mangrove forests and estuaries would expand as industrial disruption ceases. Inland, rivers that once ran through cities would overflow unmonitored, creating new wetlands and attracting species that had avoided human presence for centuries. Over the first few months, human absence would trigger a cascade of environmental and biological effects. Some species would thrive, while others, particularly those dependent on human activity, would suffer. This delicate balance would slowly shift toward a more natural equilibrium, but the legacy of humanity's industrial and technological footprint would remain a hidden danger, shaping the post-human world for centuries to come. So, what do you think would happen first? The rise of nature-reclaiming cities, or the slow decay and hidden hazards of abandoned infrastructure? Would animals adapt immediately? Or would the ghostly remnants of humanity create challenges even nature struggles to overcome? As days turn into weeks, the world would begin to change in ways most humans could never imagine. Nature doesn't wait, it seizes opportunities. Abandoned cities would become strange new ecosystems, where animals roam freely, plants sprout from cracks in asphalt, and rivers overflow without dams and levees to contain them. Urban areas, once dominated by human noise and pollution, would start to hum with the rhythms of wildlife. Coyotes, foxes, raccoons, and deer might roam highways and parks, while birds of prey circled the skies in search of abundant prey. With no humans to interfere, predator and prey relationships would quickly shift, forming a new dynamic balance in cities and suburbs alike. The disappearance of humans would also trigger dramatic changes in agriculture. Crops left in fields would begin to grow unchecked, but without maintenance, many would fail or be destroyed by pests. Orchards, vineyards, and plantations would eventually revert to wild landscapes. Livestock that survived the initial chaos would form feral herds, adapting to grazing in a way nature intended, but humans had long controlled. Over time, natural selection would favor the strongest and most adaptable animals, slowly reshaping domesticated species into wild forms. Industrial infrastructure would deteriorate rapidly. Bridges, highways, and tunnels rely on constant maintenance to survive weathering and erosion. Within weeks, small cracks in asphalt would allow plants to take root, accelerating structural damage. Within months, some highways could become impassable due to overgrowth and collapsed sections. High-rise buildings, left without maintenance, would begin to fail. Windows break from storms, and roofs cave under heavy rain or snow. Skyscrapers, the symbols of human achievement, would slowly become vertical jungles, with vines climbing their walls and birds nesting in their frames. Water systems, one of humanity's most critical achievements, would fail first. Without pumping stations, reservoirs, and filtration plants, water supplies would become stagnant and polluted. Rivers that flow through cities could overflow or change course, creating new wetlands and flood zones. Lakes might expand into previously urbanized areas, bringing back habitats for fish, amphibians, and insects. Interestingly, while this might create some environmental hazards, it also allows natural ecosystems to flourish in spaces humans once dominated. Nuclear facilities that didn't fail immediately could release radiation, forming zones that remain dangerous for decades. Chernobyl shows us that nature can survive even in extreme contamination, but these areas would become deadly for some species, while others thrive. Some animals, like wolves, foxes, and wild horses, adapt remarkably well, while others die off due to toxic exposure. The first year of humanity's absence would be a strange mix of thriving ecosystems, interspersed with pockets of environmental disaster. Fire is another hidden threat. Without humans to manage small blazes, abandoned buildings, forests, and industrial sites could catch fire and spread uncontrollably. Wildfires might destroy vegetation initially, but in the long term, they would help certain plants regenerate. Some ecosystems even depend on fire as part of their natural cycle. Over decades, a post-human Earth would likely see periodic fires shaping landscapes, contributing to a dynamic and self-regulating system. In urban areas, domesticated pets would adapt or die. Many cats would turn feral, hunting smaller animals and forming loose colonies. Dogs, particularly larger breeds, might struggle but could also form packs, rediscovering instincts bred out over centuries of human care. Livestock, if not contained, could either overgraze and die off or slowly adapt to survive without humans. Nature's ability to reclaim territory would not be uniform. It would vary depending on climate, geography, and the species present. Coastal ecosystems would undergo profound changes. Beaches, once heavily polluted, would slowly become pristine. Coral reefs, no longer threatened by overfishing and human interference, could start to regenerate. Mangrove forests and estuaries might expand, creating safe havens for marine and bird life. Oceans would benefit greatly from the sudden absence of human activity, with shipping lanes empty, pollution reduced, and fisheries left to recover naturally. Sharks, whales, and dolphins would roam with fewer obstacles, while seabirds could recolonize nesting areas without human disruption. Air quality would improve dramatically, cities choked with smog would clear within weeks, and skies would be visibly bluer. Plants would thrive without pollutants, contributing to carbon absorption and gradually slowing climate change trends in localized regions. Rivers would purify themselves as sediments settle, and wildlife populations adjust, creating healthier ecosystems over time. Even the Arctic and Antarctic, long affected by human activity, would begin to experience subtle recovery as greenhouse gas emissions cease and industrial impacts disappear. Interestingly, some scientists theorize that the planet's ecosystems might achieve a level of biodiversity unseen for centuries. Areas heavily urbanized or industrialized would become hotspots for adaptation. New ecological niches would emerge, and species that were previously endangered or suppressed could flourish. Over decades, evolution could accelerate in unexpected ways, with animals and plants adapting to novel environments created by abandoned human infrastructure. However, not everything would be peaceful. Abandoned industrial sites, chemical plants, and storage facilities would continue to release toxins. Some zones could become uninhabitable for centuries. Earthquakes, storms, and other natural disasters could trigger secondary catastrophes in abandoned human settlements, from collapsed buildings to chemical spills. While nature is resilient, the remnants of humanity's technological footprint would create dangerous and unpredictable environments. Satellites, space stations, and other orbiting machinery would continue their routines for a while, but without maintenance. Most would fail within months or years. Communication networks would disappear, leaving the planet silent in terms of human messaging and monitoring. Weather forecasting would stop, making it impossible to predict storms, droughts, or volcanic eruptions. For any surviving life forms, the absence of humans would remove artificial barriers, but also the safety nets that sometimes mitigate natural disasters. So, after months, the world would already look unrecognizable. Cities would slowly crumble, rivers and forests would expand, and wildlife would flourish in some areas while disappearing in others. Nature would reclaim its territory aggressively, yet pockets of danger, chemical, radioactive, and structural, would remain. The first year of a human-free Earth would be a delicate balance between chaos and recovery, with some areas thriving, while others are slow to heal. What do you think would dominate the first year? The rapid expansion of nature into human spaces, or the hidden hazards and decaying infrastructure left behind? Would Earth immediately start to flourish, or would our technological remnants pose threats even long after we are gone? Decades after humanity disappears, the Earth would look dramatically different. Cities that were once vibrant hubs of human activity would now be strange, silent forests of concrete and steel. Nature is relentless and patient, and without humans to maintain infrastructure, plants would break through asphalt, vines climb skyscrapers, and trees grow where parking lots once sprawled. Skyscrapers might partially collapse under decades of weathering, leaving skeletal towers overtaken by vegetation, roofs caved in, windows shattered by storms, and streets cracked and uneven would allow water to collect, creating small ponds and wetlands in the heart of urban centers. Rivers would reclaim their natural paths, no longer constrained by dams and levees designed to protect human settlements. Floodplains would expand, wetlands would form, and migratory birds would find new resting places along once urbanized coasts. In many areas, fish populations could rebound dramatically without overfishing or pollution. Oceans, too, would gradually cleanse themselves of microplastics and chemical pollutants as runoff slows and human industrial activity ceases. Coral reefs could regenerate in many regions, giving rise to vibrant underwater ecosystems teeming with life. Wildlife adaptation would become more apparent in these decades. Animals that had become used to human proximity would either flourish or face extinction depending on their adaptability. Cities would host feral dog packs, colonies of cats, and urban-adapted wildlife such as pigeons, raccoons, and foxes. Over time, evolutionary pressures could begin subtly reshaping these animals, favoring traits suited for survival in abandoned urban landscapes. Likewise, domesticated animals like cattle, goats, and chickens might slowly revert to more wild behaviors, forming feral herds that adapt to grazing freely, while weaker individuals would not survive. Forests would expand dramatically, especially in regions that were heavily logged or farmed. The Amazon, the Congo, and the boreal forests of Canada and Russia would see significant regrowth, reclaiming areas previously cleared for agriculture. In temperate zones, abandoned farmlands would gradually return to forest or grassland ecosystems. Species that had once been endangered due to human encroachment would thrive, potentially leading to a surge in biodiversity unseen for centuries. Wolves, bears, big cats, and large herbivores could spread into territories previously dominated by humans, re-establishing predator-prey dynamics that had been disrupted for millennia. Long-abandoned buildings would slowly collapse under the combined forces of weather, gravity, and root systems breaking concrete and steel. Over decades, entire neighborhoods could be swallowed by plant life. Cities would become labyrinths of tunnels, fallen walls, and overgrown streets. Nature would weave itself into every corner, creating habitats for countless species. Small mammals, reptiles, and birds would find shelter in what were once offices, apartments, and subways, effectively transforming human architecture into part of the ecosystem. Some infrastructure, however, would continue to pose hidden dangers. Chemical plants, abandoned nuclear sites, and industrial facilities could leak toxins into surrounding soils and rivers. Even decades later, these zones might remain hazardous, creating ghost ecosystems where only the hardiest species survive. Fires, caused by lightning strikes or spontaneous combustion, could sweep through abandoned forests and cities alike, shaping vegetation patterns and providing opportunities for fire-adapted species to thrive. In this new world, survival would favor adaptability and resilience over sheer strength or size. Climate patterns would also gradually adjust to the absence of humans. Carbon emissions would drop to near zero, allowing the atmosphere to slowly recover. Within decades, air quality would improve worldwide. Ozone levels could stabilize, and average temperatures might begin to decrease in areas most affected by industrial pollution. Glacial regions would slowly advance, rivers fed by melting ice would balance out, and seasonal weather patterns would stabilize. Although extreme events such as storms and droughts would still occur naturally, the Earth, free from human interference, would slowly regain a more natural rhythm, balancing ecosystems on a global scale. Coastal areas would transform dramatically. Without human interference, mangroves and salt marshes would expand, protecting shorelines from erosion and providing habitats for fish, crustaceans, and birds. Beaches previously covered with trash would return to pristine conditions, while dunes and wetlands would naturally shift and stabilize. Ocean ecosystems, freed from overfishing, would see the return of large predators like sharks and whales, as well as the resurgence of smaller species that had previously been overexploited. Archaeological remnants of human civilization would slowly decay, but some structures could persist for centuries. Stone monuments, underground tunnels, and large concrete constructions might last far longer than wood, metal, or glass buildings. Future wildlife would incorporate these ruins into their ecosystems, and long after humans are gone, curious researchers, or perhaps alien explorers millions of years from now, might stumble upon these relics, piecing together the story of our existence from faint traces of what we once built. Even in the absence of humans, natural selection would continue its work. Species would compete for resources, adapt to changing climates, and evolve in ways that humans might have never predicted. Evolutionary pressures could lead to the emergence of new behaviors, diets, and even physical adaptations in animals living in post-human environments. Some scientists speculate that over hundreds or thousands of years, entirely new species could emerge from the descendants of domesticated animals, wild survivors, and opportunistic species that thrived in the niches created by humanity's disappearance. So, as decades pass, the world would be transformed into a patchwork of thriving ecosystems and decaying human structures. Nature would reclaim dominance, reshaping landscapes and ecosystems, while the ghosts of humanity's technological footprint linger as silent reminders. What do you imagine would be left of our cities after 50 years? Would some areas remain recognizably human? Or would nature fully reclaim every street and building? How might evolution adapt to the opportunities we leave behind? Centuries after humanity's disappearance, the world would look almost unrecognizable. Cities, once symbols of human achievement, would be little more than ruins overtaken by nature. Skyscrapers would crumble, leaving skeletal frameworks shrouded in vines and trees. Roads and highways would have cracked and eroded completely, allowing forests, grasslands, and wetlands to expand across what was once concrete and asphalt. Bridges would collapse into rivers, and tunnels might be flooded or caved in. Even large dams and artificial lakes could fail, reshaping landscapes and creating new rivers, valleys, and wetlands where humans once controlled water flow. Ecosystems would be flourishing in ways that are difficult to imagine today. Large predators like wolves, bears, Big cats and birds of prey would roam territories previously restricted by human development. Herbivores such as deer, bison, and elephants would populate open spaces, grazing freely and shaping the land through their movements. In urban areas, animals that adapted to human environments, dogs, cats, and pigeons, might evolve into entirely new species, better suited for life in the ruins of cities and towns. Over hundreds of years, natural selection would favor traits that allow species to exploit the unique ecological niches created by abandoned human settlements. Forests would expand aggressively into former agricultural zones. Croplands, once cultivated for human food, would slowly revert to wild ecosystems. Orchards and plantations would transform into mixed forests, with trees, shrubs, and undergrowth competing for sunlight and nutrients. Wetlands would reappear, rivers would carve new paths through abandoned lands, and grasslands would flourish in areas previously used for grazing livestock. The Earth would begin to resemble a planet untouched by humans, with biodiversity levels likely surpassing anything seen in the last few centuries of human activity. Coastal regions would undergo radical transformations as well. Mangroves and salt marshes would expand, stabilizing shorelines and creating natural barriers against storms. Coral reefs, freed from overfishing and pollution, would recover dramatically, creating vibrant underwater ecosystems. Fish, marine mammals, and invertebrates would repopulate areas that had been heavily exploited, and migratory species would rediscover breeding grounds that humans had disrupted. Beaches would become pristine again, dunes shifting naturally, and coastal vegetation reclaiming land that had been cleared for human activity. The remnants of human technology would slowly degrade. Concrete, steel, and stone structures would resist decay longer than wood or glass, but even they would not escape the power of weather and time. Earthquakes, erosion, and plant growth would eventually reduce buildings to piles of rubble, while underground infrastructure might persist longer, becoming habitats for burrowing animals, fungi, and microorganisms. Archaeologists of the future, or potentially intelligent species millions of years later, might find only faint traces of human civilization, piecing together our existence from fragments of durable materials and geochemical signatures in the soil. Climate patterns would continue to stabilize over centuries. With humans gone, carbon emissions would drop to near zero, allowing atmospheric CO2 levels to decrease gradually. Global temperatures could decline slightly. Ice caps would expand in polar regions, and ocean currents might adjust to the absence of industrial heating. Natural climate variability would continue. Storms, droughts, and volcanic eruptions. But without human interference, ecosystems would be better able to adapt to these changes. Forests, grasslands, and wetlands would act as natural buffers, absorbing carbon, controlling floods, and regulating local climates. In this post-human world, evolution would accelerate in unique ways. Species that had been domesticated or adapted to human environments would face new pressures. Dogs, for example, might evolve into entirely new forms adapted for survival in urban ruins or forests. Cats could become apex predators in certain areas. Birds, insects, and small mammals would exploit niches previously unavailable due to human presence, potentially leading to entirely new species emerging over centuries. Even plants would adapt to abandoned cities, colonizing roofs, streets, and walls, creating entirely novel ecosystems. Natural disasters would continue to shape the Earth in unexpected ways. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and tsunamis would occur as always, but without humans, the effects would no longer be catastrophic in a societal sense. Instead, these events would act as ecological resets, allowing some species to flourish while temporarily reducing populations of others. Fires, caused by lightning strikes or spontaneous combustion, would sweep through abandoned forests and cities, contributing to the natural cycle of destruction and regrowth that shapes ecosystems over time. One of the most fascinating aspects of this centuries-long transformation is the way nature reclaims what humans built. Forests would envelop cities, rivers would carve new courses through old towns, and wildlife would dominate spaces once considered unnatural for their presence. Over centuries, the world would evolve into a patchwork of habitats, blending former human settlements with fully restored ecosystems. Areas that were once heavily industrialized might be indistinguishable from untouched wilderness, except for occasional ruins, slowly eroding into the landscape. Even the oceans would undergo remarkable transformations. Shipping lanes and ports would vanish, allowing marine life to migrate freely. Coral reefs would expand, fish populations would rebound, and migratory species would recolonize areas previously off limits. Whittle populations could recover dramatically, filling ecological roles that had been suppressed for centuries. Seabirds would return to nesting areas, and previously overexploited ecosystems would thrive, creating a new balance in the planet's aquatic systems. After several centuries, humans would exist only in memory and geological traces. Fossilized remains, chemical signatures in rocks and soils, and the occasional durable structure might provide faint clues to the species that once dominated the planet. Evolution would continue its slow, inexorable work, reshaping life in ways humans could not predict. New species would emerge from the descendants of animals we once domesticated, wild survivors, and opportunistic organisms that thrived in the niches we left behind. So, after hundreds of years, the Earth would be almost unrecognizable. Cities swallowed by forests, rivers and wetlands expanded, oceans teeming with life, and countless new species evolving to fill ecological niches once disrupted by humans. The traces of our civilization would be fading, leaving behind a planet that, while forever shaped by our presence, would be vibrant, dynamic, and free. What would it take for life to completely forget humans existed? Could the Earth eventually erase all evidence of our impact, or would some subtle imprint last for millennia? Millennia after humans vanish, the Earth would have almost entirely healed from our presence. Mountains, rivers, and oceans would continue their natural cycles, shaping landscapes in ways that have been happening for billions of years. Forests would dominate former cities, plains would stretch across abandoned farmlands, and wetlands and rivers would carve new paths. The ruins of human civilization would be reduced to faint geological anomalies, foundations buried under sediment, traces of concrete and metal slowly corroded, and chemical signatures in the soil marking areas once inhabited. Life would continue to evolve, adapting to the world without humans. Descendants of domesticated animals might have become entirely new species, some thriving in forests, others in open plains or near water sources. Wild animals that survived initial decades and centuries would now have established populations and territories, and predator-prey dynamics would stabilize into long-lasting ecosystems. Birds would dominate the skies, and insects would fill every available niche, pollinating plants and maintaining ecological balance. Even plants would evolve over millennia. Trees and shrubs colonizing abandoned cities could become unique species adapted to urban ruins. Grasslands expanding over farmlands would harbor a diversity of plants shaped by natural selection, creating entirely new ecological communities. Forests would grow denser, with canopies high above, where skyscrapers once pierced the skyline, forming lush, layered ecosystems that few humans had ever witnessed in their original form. The oceans, now free from human exploitation, would host fully recovered marine ecosystems. Coral reefs would thrive, supporting thousands of species. Migratory routes for whales, sharks, and birds would be re-established. Coastal habitats would stabilize, and sea levels might adjust slightly as ice sheets recover. Earth's climate would stabilize into patterns dictated by natural forces rather than human activity, with seasonal cycles and natural variations governing weather, ocean currents, and ecological interactions. Human structures would mostly disappear. Only the most durable creations, such as monuments, underground tunnels, and deep foundations, might persist in some form. Fossilized remains, preserved in rock layers, or as trace fossils, would be the primary record of our existence. Future life forms, whether evolved animals or intelligent species millions of years later, might only know of humans through these faint traces and chemical markers, piecing together the story of a species that once dominated the planet. Geological changes would continue, slowly erasing our presence. Soil erosion, tectonic activity, and natural weathering would break down remaining buildings and infrastructure. Rivers would wash away roads, earthquakes would flatten remnants of human settlements, and volcanoes could bury areas under ash. Over thousands or tens of thousands of years, only subtle hints of humanity would remain, and eventually, even these would fade, leaving a planet where life has fully reclaimed its domain. This millennia-long perspective highlights both the fragility and resilience of life on Earth. While human civilization left a profound mark, the natural world is capable of recovering, adapting, and thriving in our absence. Evolution continues to shape life, climate stabilizes, and ecosystems balance themselves without interference. Even our technological footprint, impressive as it was, becomes a minor geological note in the planet's long history. The Earth, free from humans, would become a planet of endless adaptation and change. Species would rise and fall, landscapes would transform, and life would continue in a cycle of growth, decay, and renewal. Humanity's story, once dominant, would fade into the background of Earth's geological and ecological timeline. Yet, the faint traces of our existence, fossils, chemical signatures, and durable structures, would remain, telling a story to anyone or anything that discovers them in the distant future. After millennia, the question remains, how would life remember humans, if at all? Would the planet fully erase our presence, leaving no trace? Or would subtle clues persist for millions of years, whispering the story of a species that vanished overnight? The answer lies in the extraordinary resilience of life and the inexorable forces of nature, slowly reclaiming every inch of a world we once dominated.